I'm trying to get a good grasp on the Orthodox understanding of doctrinal development. I've talked to a few, lower level Orthodox, apologist type accounts and just haven't really got like a solid explanation. So I know it's kind of a general question, but if you could just,
No, I don't mind. In fact, I think it's actually an important point where we disagree with the Roman Catholic position, at least the post Newman type position. Yeah, I think that we don't believe that truth or the propositions or the doctrines themselves, quote, develop in the sense of any kind of evolution. So, for example, when we see the idea that Newman proposes that the papacy is like a seed that grows into a tree, we would reject that notion of development. I think we would hold to the idea that the fullness of the faith existed and was there from the beginning in terms of the apostolic deposit. That's why Jude can say, the faith once for all delivered to the saints. But I think that as the ecumenical councils deal with various heresies, they do use precise terms that explicate the faith in a more exact way. And so, for example, something like in hypostatized is not mentioned in the first
right,
century, but even though it's something that's much later, the idea is there. So just like the Trinity, like
right,
the word Trinitas used by Theophilus or Tertullian, like the idea is in the Old Testament, but the term isn't.
right. Okay. So it seems like the Orthodox position would kind of be in between the Catholic and Protestant as far as, the essence of whatever the doctrine has been there. And maybe we, develop our terminology, but we don't actually develop the doctrine or the dogma itself.
Yeah, I guess it just depends on what a person means by develop. Like, if develop means evolution of doctrine, no. But if it means explication, okay, yeah, there's nothing inherently wrong with the word develop. Also, I would say, like, when you look at the ecumenical councils, usually when they start, like, the first statement in the canons is something like, we here gathered at the Council of Nicaea in conformity with everything that the Holy Fathers of, and then they list the previous councils,
Hmm.
right? So that it's as if the intention is to simply restate what that faith
Right.
was, not to develop it or tack on to it or anything like that.
Gotcha. Appreciate it.
Hmm. What did you do you think that? And I'm trying to put you on the spot, but do you think that that's like a something that the Roman Catholic Church has over the Orthodox position that's superior, or what's your take on that?
Um, well, honestly, I'm still just trying to, understand it before I really plant my flag in. I like to kind of get it all on the table, but um, it seems like the distinction between the Orthodox and the Catholic position is what actually constitutes as a evolutionary development, you know, because from my understanding, the Catholic position would, for example, on the papacy would be that, they would likely deny this idea that this is a new evolution. They would say that it existed in seed form, so it existed in essence, but then our understanding of it, grows.
Well, for example, let me give an example, like the video I did not too long ago of the temporal power of the Roman bishop. Um, except for the donation of Constantine, I'm not aware of anything like that in the first 8 centuries of the church. And then the, in fact, the evidence is to the contrary because the canons of Chalcedon forbid any cleric from being in civil office. So that's one example of where the arguments for the role of the papacy, never in the first few centuries, the church included this idea that he was also a geopolitical world ruler. Later on, that's argued to be included in the idea of the Roman bishop or the papacy in its office. And, when you read something like Unum Sanctum, it's like, well, if Peter is the spiritual head of the church, then by extension, he's also the physical
Right.
head and the spiritual head of everybody on earth. So we would say, well, that's not present anywhere in the first 1,000 years of the church. It's a clear quote unquote,
Right.
development in the sense of evolution.
Yep.
So I have a question for you. Like, if that's the case, like, and if the papacy post Vatican II seems to have discarded any idea of the temporal power of the Roman bishop, or that anything to me being anything necessary. Like, how would you adjudicate contradiction versus evolution of doctrine?
Right, and that's what I mean when I say, I think that's where the conversation, you know, flows from.
Right.
Earlier you were talking about the different language that not necessarily developed at Nicaea, but the language that they came up with to be able to describe the realities that had always existed. Um, you
hmm
know,
Yeah, but do you think that the idea of the Roman bishop having temporal power that's necessary for salvation, and then no longer claiming that as necessary for salvation as a doctrine, that it seems more than language? That seems like way more than
are
language.
you talking about extra ecclesia nihil salus, no salvation outside the church, or are you talking about something different?
No, no, I'm talking about temporal supremacy of the Roman bishop, that he is not just the spiritual head of all the church and of all humanity, but that he is also, by extension, the physical king and ruler of every king on the world. He's a worldly, political, geopolitical ruler, and that you must believe also in the temporal supremacy to be saved.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that at all, so I don't want to speak on it.
That's fine.
Um,
It's the document is, if you look up Dictatus Papae, is the first beginning claims of that. That's in about 1090, and then if you follow that all the way through to Unum Sanctum, which is 1382, those centuries are where we get this development of the claims that the Pope is also basically the Kwisatz Haderach. Um, and what I'm getting at is that that's no longer believed or professed or required of Catholics. To me, that's a
yeah,
contradiction.
what would what would like a Catholic theologian, what would their defense to that claim be?
Everybody I've asked this to, I've not seen a sufficient reply
Yeah,
to. My guess would be that you would have to posit some sort of evolution or development of doctrine that allows for uh, like canceling out things that are necessary for
right.
salvation from previous millennia. I mean, I don't know how else you would go about
Yeah.
it.
Okay.
Like the Pope can just simply like cancel out everything his predecessors did. But if that's the case, then like there's not really any basis to criticize Francis. At that point, like he's not really bound by anything that his predecessors. Another example of this would be the idea of the death penalty. Like it used to be in classical Roman Catholic theology, the death penalty was connected to natural law and natural justice. But Francis has said consistently for the last several years that the death penalty is, quote, contrary to the gospel. So it's not, so now it's almost like natural law itself in Catholic theology is sort of under the foot of Francis.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, I'm no expert on that topic at all, but just from, the little reading I have done, it comes down to that distinction between, what are we gonna label a evolution, versus
Yeah, but the problem with this example is that this is natural law, natural justice. That doesn't evolve, that doesn't
yeah.
change.
From my
That'd be like saying the unnatural vice of
right,
homosexuality used to be wrong, but not
right.
anymore.
From my understanding, when it comes to the death penalty, it's not about the natural law position. It's it sounds like their argument is basically, you know, we live in an economic surplus. There's
No, I think again, not in. That's what I'm saying. If you look at classic Catholic moral theologies, it is connected to natural law, and natural justice. I think the Catechism of Trent connects it to that. I think
the old position or
uh,
Francis's position.
the old
Right.
position, the old
Yeah, I'm
position.
talking about Francis's position.
Well, but what I'm saying is like if it is connected to natural law, natural theology, like that can't change. But you're saying that Francis doesn't connect to that. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, from my understanding,
No, that's
yeah,
correct.
he makes
Right.
the argument that, we live in an economic surplus, and he gives like practical reasons why, you know, death penalty
Yes, I've
used to
seen that.
be, permissible, and why it's, circumstances change, etc. But again, it just falls back to that, are we, when it comes to something that is done slightly different or even, drastically different, do we label it, an evolution or a development? The Protestants, Gavin Orland would call it accretion. He loves that phrase. So, which is why I was asking you about the Orthodox position on doctrinal development.
Yeah, no, well. See, I think he says that because Ibarra makes really bad arguments when they argue about this. That the Seventh Ecumenical Council is a development in terms of icons, but the problem with Ibarra's argument is that when you read the council itself, it actually argues that it's not a development and that it is the apostolic tradition that's actually in the
Right.
council. So I think if Ibarra concedes development, then he's already kind of conceding too much um, to Ortland on accretions.
Yeah.
Anything else?
No, appreciate you answering, doctrinal development. Um, what briefly, what is because right now the canon has been in talk on YouTube, between Protestants and Catholics, and ever since Wesley Huff went on Rogan, and then he's kind of been, doing some other things. There's been, you know, a, a resurgence of the dispute of the Old Testament canon. Um, can you kind of give me, you know, your understanding? Um, because it seems like Protestants just continue to say that the Jews had a set canon, and it seems to me like that's just demonstrably false. Um, especially
Well, even if there's a kind of a loose, it depends on what time period they're talking about, like in the Old Testament or in the days
no,
of
they're
Christ. I mean,
yeah,
even
they're
if
talking about the
go
days
ahead.
of Christ. I mean, when they speak of this, they say that the canon was pretty much settled.
Well, there is some notion of like a collected, authoritative body of text. But if you watch the debate that I did with Dr. Branson and I with it's me and him versus Dale the Protestant on YouTube. It's a really good debate because Dr. Branson goes into the actual Jewish practice, even in the time of Christ, of how they would interpret the law and settle disputes. And the point is that it's never a sola scriptura thing. Like you don't just go to the Bible and prove your case. It's actually the Levites or the rabbinical structure that Ezra set up, like at your local synagogue or whatever, where you would have the case judged, and it's judged in a synodal way by the elders or the Levite or the priest if you're, at the temple or whatever. And it's also not just on the basis of scripture. There is also valid Jewish tradition. I'm not saying all Jewish traditions or all Talmudic traditions are valid, but Jesus in the New Testament in many places references authentic oral tradition. That's why, for example, Isaiah says, to the law and the
Right.
testimony, indicating both written and oral tradition. So that's not true even in the history of Judaism. Jews were never sola scripturis. So that's just Protestants reading sola scriptura into Judaism. But then on top of that, of course, like what does that have to do with the authority that Christ gave to the apostles to establish the canon of scripture? Because Protestants always want to say that the Jews determine the
Right.
canon. No, they don't. The apostles do.
Well,
But by the way, they were Jews. So,
yeah,
like, yeah, if that's who you
yeah,
mean.
and that's the point I'm making. I just, I just keep like thinking like surely there's a stronger argument. And I watched a video of one of Huff's colleagues. I forget what his name is. He's a canon professor. Uh, like I said, I can't remember what his name was, but that's essentially the position they take, and it's just like I don't know. I don't understand.
Well, Protestantism, and this kind of goes to the earlier point about Dr. Spencer, which is odd because I think his background is Uniate. So he was like a Lebanese Uniate who he was baptized Orthodox, became a Uniate, and then went back to Orthodox a few years ago. And so it's like, well, did he at some point like get imbibed with Protestant ideas about covenant theology? Because I mean, neither the traditional Roman Catholic Church nor the Orthodox Church teaches any kind of dual covenant theology, which maybe he doesn't have a dual covenant theology position. I don't know, but it sounds. I mean, he sounds like just an average evangelical, like pushing the same positions that David Wood or any of these people are pushing. So, I mean, like that's not obviously the historical Christian church position.
Cool. I'll have to check out that debate. What'd you say, Dr. Brandt?
It's Jay Dyer versus Dale the
Gotcha.
Protestant, and Dr. Branson gives about a 30-minute discussion in that debate, or sort of exposition in that debate about the actual modus operandi at the time of Christ, like as to how the law was understood and
Mhm.
interpreted. It was not sola scriptura. The point is just it's not sola
Right.
scriptura. Like Jews had the same kind of three-tiered stool of um, authoritative priests and Levites,
Right.
prophets, um, written text, and tradition. All three of those things were legs of the
Right.
stool. And the church, when it was created, adopted that same structure,
Yep.
right? With priesthood and the bishops, tradition of the church, and the scriptures. They all function together. And Protestants obviously want to get rid of two of those legs and just have one of the legs of the
Right.
stool. But the irony is that they think they're being more quote Jewish, or they're
Right.
going back to the but they're actually being not doing the Jewish
Yeah.
position.
I don't know if you saw Redeem Zoomer made a post today, and he said something. It was like a simple sentence. It's something along the lines of, "Guys, let's stop pretending that Protestantism is early Christianity, like the original Christianity. Like
No, I
it
didn't say
wasn't."
that. That's an interesting
Yeah,
admission.
yeah, and but basically his position was, but that's okay. The whole point of Protestantism is progressivism, and I just that's where it's like sometimes he posts stuff and it's like, you're on the right track, and then he'll say something like that.